and I don't know the second person you're referring to, but MIT professor Ted Postel and the inspectors of the OPCW provided some credible questions that deserved examination.
Okay, thank you. Did you attempt to weigh Postel's claims against the significant evidence and assessments already conducted by the IC?
Yes, I did.
Okay, thank you. So here's my concern here, Colonel. When we began this, you described a thoughtful approach to analyzing intelligence and reaching conclusions. This is what we expect of our professionals. But we just kind of walked through how you came to question Assad's use of chemical weapons in these two cases with a different approach. And I don't reject seeking out differing viewpoints. We need to do that. But you started from a place of doubting the conclusions of the U.S. intelligence community, and then you sought out information that confirmed your viewpoint. That led you to embrace the opinions of two individuals that I think we disagree on this. You think they had expertise, I do not, and others do not. But these individuals were sympathetic to Russia and the Assad regime. It also led you to minimize or discount the overwhelmingly information that contradicted your viewpoint, including the expert assessments of our own intelligence community. And they don't get it right 100% of the time. I get that. But what I have seen makes it clear that at the same time that you were skeptical of our intelligence community's assessments, you would not apply the same skepticism to information that came from sympathizers of Russia and Assad. And I think that's something that we should all be concerned about. Thank you, and I'm sorry for going on.
Thank you, Senator Kelly. Recognize and welcome to the committee our newest member, Senator Budd, although we all regret Senator Rubio's departure. We're all pleased, as evidenced by the 99-0 vote, that he is now the Secretary of State, and that also pleased that we have a great new member on our committee, Senator Budd.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm grateful for your leadership here as well. Colonel Gabbard, great to see you again. I enjoyed meeting you in my office a while back, and I've enjoyed our friendship and our time serving together in the U.S. House. So as you know, Section 3023 of Title 50 states any individual nominated for appointment as DNI shall have extensive national security expertise. You served 4 terms as a member of the House of Representatives, which is a constitutional office, and throughout your tenure, you were a member of the Armed Services Committee and the Foreign Affairs Committee. Is that correct?
Yes, Senator.
You also served over 2 decades in the U.S. Army, including holding commands at multiple levels, and served through administrations of both political parties. Is that correct?
Yes, Senator.
Through your time in the U.S. House and in the Army, you've been both a consumer of intelligence and a policymaker. How important is it for the intelligence community to provide timely, relevant, factual, and objective intelligence to policymakers?
Senator, it is nothing less than a matter of our national security. Too often in the multitude of intelligence failures that our country has seen, that objective has not been met. Now, CIA Director Ratcliffe talked about in his testimony before this committee how the CIA's own internal metrics have shown that analytic objectivity has gone down within that organization. This is the very kind of thing that I would seek to address if confirmed as Director of National Intelligence, is ensuring that politics, biases, or personal views are checked at the door. I would lead by example by doing it myself, and ensuring that that intelligence analysis and reporting meets the objective that the President and Congress requires, which is no politics, no personal abuses, and making sure that that objectivity in a timely, relevant fashion is brought to the President so that we can get ahead of problems in ensuring our national security rather than being caught on our heels and being forced to respond to them.
Thank you for that. I think it's clear from your background experience that you more than meet the statutory requirements for this position. I want to switch gears a little bit. There's been a lot of discussion today. I think it's a necessary discussion about your position on Section 702 of FISA. So I've personally had concerns, and I think we even talked about this when we served in the House together, and I actually voted against its reauthorization when I was in the House. However, I recently voted to reauthorize Section 702 with additional safeguards to end the politicization of the tool and to ensure privacy and civil liberties that they're protected. So, Ms. Gabbard, tell us, how has your thinking on Section 702 developed over time, and why? And if confirmed, what will you do to ensure that this new statutory safeguards, that they're fully implemented?
Well, Senator, as you pointed out, many of the concerns that we raised when we served in the House of Representatives were centered around the lack of safeguards to protect Americans' Fourth Amendment rights and civil liberties as it pertains to searching of U.S. persons with that incidental collection that occurs under 702. You and I both know and agree that the national security capability that is provided by Section 702 that enables this foreign surveillance on non-U.S. persons overseas is critical, period. My commitment is to make sure that our national security tools are maintained to fulfill that requirement while also protecting Americans' Fourth Amendment rights and protection against unlawful search and seizure. There are a number of those reforms that you referenced, such as the prohibition of abouts collection, which we brought up when we served in the House, making sure that 100% of U.S. persons by the FBI on this incidental collection are reviewed by the Attorney General herself. There are a number of other reforms that I believe strengthen significantly those safeguards, a number of them that I had worked to try to bring into place when I was in the House of Representatives. I look forward, if confirmed as Director of National Intelligence, to overseeing and assessing the implementation of these reforms and reporting back to you as you begin to consider next year's reauthorization and meeting that mark of ensuring our security and upholding Americans' Fourth Amendment protections.
Thank you. Switching gears a little bit, talk briefly, if you will, about the dual task of simultaneously protecting whistleblowers and protecting classified information.
Senator, there are more than sufficient legally protected routes for whistleblowers to come forward should they have concerns on any actions occurring within the intelligence community. I've spoken about the additional protections that I personally will put in place if confirmed as Director of National Intelligence, understanding the seriousness of protecting our nation's secrets, and one that I hold personally.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Budd. I will recognize Senator Wicker, an ex officio member of our committee, which is Latin for so powerful a man he can go to any committee he wants and ask questions anytime.
I look at it differently, Mr. Chairman. I think what you're saying is that I'm the only non-voting member of this committee that's here at this hearing, and I've been at an Armed Services Committee hearing most of the morning. Let me ask about something that happened a long time ago and something that's happening right now. Colonel Gabbard, I was a member of the House of Representatives on 9/11, 2001. As a matter of fact, I was at the Pentagon that very morning when the attacks happened. Where were you when 9/11? We all remember where we were.
Yes, I was in Hawaii. There was a 5 or 6 hour time difference. And so when I woke up that morning, it was several hours. And I remember the first thing I saw in waking up was that horrific footage of those airplanes attacking the Twin Towers in New York City.
And I think you obviously have read a lot about it during the 24 plus years since that, and most Americans have. There's a general consensus that there was a massive intelligence failure. This caught us all by surprise, even though the World Trade Center had been attacked earlier. Do you think stovepiping was a problem in our intelligence failure?
There's no question about it, Senator.
Oh, okay. Well, based on your reading. Okay, wait, could you elaborate just?
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely, Senator. When we looked back at the post 9/11 reporting and the post assessments that were made, it was very clear that there was stovepiping of information and intelligence that occurred at many levels, at the highest but also at the lowest levels where information that was collected by the FBI, information that was collected by the CIA, was not being shared. There was almost ships passing in the night, where if there was an integration of those intelligence elements and information being shared, it is highly likely that that horrific attack could have been prevented.
And that's the reason, really, your position was created. There's been some discussion this morning. I have not been able to listen in, but I understand there's been some discussion about reforming the Office of D&I to eliminate redundancy and increase effectiveness. Do you worry that in doing so, we might be getting back to the same problem that we had in 2001?
The problem that we had in 2001, Senator, remains at the forefront of my mind. And as you said, this is exactly why the ODNI was created. Given my limited vantage point not being in this seat, I am concerned that there are still problems with stovepiping that need to be addressed. And in some cases, my concern would be that unnecessary bureaucratic layers may be contributing to that problem. This is where coming in and being able to really take a fresh look, given my experience and my background, will be essential to making sure that the ODNI is accomplishing the reason why it was created in the first place.
Okay, and I have a lot of suggestions about how to make the Department of Defense more efficient also. I would simply caution you before I move on to my other quick question, that as we are trying to eliminate overlaps, that we avoid getting back to the thing that created your agency to start with. Now, let me just ask about anomalous health incidents. I know you're not in the intelligence community yet, but having read, as most of us have, about these Havana syndrome incidents, what is your understanding of that now, and what are your plans?
Yeah, Senator, thank you for this question. It's been deeply concerning throughout this period, from the first time this was discovered so long ago to where we are today, that the intelligence community still has failed to identify the source and the cause for Havana syndrome, as it's commonly known, even as many people who are in service are suffering the consequences of it. I look forward, if confirmed as Director of National Intelligence, to addressing this, of course, making sure that those who have been impacted are getting the care that they need and deserve, but getting to the truth behind how and why this has occurred.
Are you saying that we're not any closer to understanding where these came from?
Based on my understanding, there has not been any definitive reporting from the intelligence community on the source and the cause for these anomalous health incidents.
Okay, well, perhaps you'd like to, I can follow up on the record.
I'd look forward to that.
I think there's some more public information that is recent about that. Thank you, ma'am. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Senator.
Senator Wicker, as I acknowledged at the outset, it is the custom of this committee to allow a follow-up question for senators who remain present at the end of the regular 5-minute round of questions. I remember everyone, this is a follow-up question, not a 5-minute round. We will have Ms. Gabbard in a closed session where each of us will have yet another 5-minute round of questioning. Is there any senator who wishes to be recognized for a follow-up question? Senator Wyden.
Thank you very much. Ms. Gabbard, there was an area that I believe is still uncertain, and this is what my question's about. Earlier this week, the Trump administration illegally attempted to withhold federal funds from a broad range of organizations. I'm interested in knowing what you would do if President Trump told you to withhold congressionally approved funds from the Intelligence Community Inspector General. So my question is, if President Trump orders you to withhold appropriated funds from the Inspector General, will you refuse that illegal order?
I don't believe for a second President Trump would ask me to do something that would break the law.
That's not what I'm asking. I'm asking, if you are asked about an illegal order, what will you do? You can say, oh, it'll never happen. What will you do if you're dealing with an illegal order?
My commitment has been and will be, if confirmed as Director of National Intelligence, to comply with the law.
Given
Are there, Senator Wyden,
Can
Senator
I
Wyden,
finish this sentence?
you've actually asked two questions already, Senator
I'm not
Wyden.
asking a question.
You've asked two questions. I said there's one question allowed. Are there other senators who would like to follow up a question? Senator King.
I'd like to follow up on my line of questioning about Edward Snowden and understand how you analyzed the facts leading up to your 2020 bill providing him with a pardon. There was the House committee report, which granted was redacted, but under the heading, "What damage did it cause?" were 5.5 pages of redacted material. I would have thought that would raise a question in your mind. Secondly, Edward Snowden, there are about 20 countries that don't have extradition treaties with the U.S. He chose to go to Russia, become a Russian citizen. That information, how did you decide to introduce a bill providing him with a pardon? Introducing a bill in the United States Congress is not the same as a tweet or a commentary on a podcast. I'm concerned about your apparent lack of interest in the scope of Edward Snowden's traitorous activities.
Senator, I've answered some version of this question many times in this hearing already. My foremost concern has been, remains, and will continue to be in upholding my oath to the Constitution to support and defend Americans' Fourth Amendment constitutional rights. If confirmed as Director of National Intelligence, I'm committed to ensuring that we protect our nation's secrets by implementing a number of actions I've outlined so that those who have concerns about programs within our intelligence community, that we don't have another Snowden-like leak, and they are able to raise those concerns either directly with Congress or through any one of a number of legal paths that are available. And I think it's also important, and in line with many of the bipartisan concerns I've heard from this committee, in security classification, security clearance and classification reform, in narrowing severely those who have access to the most sensitive and compartmentalized intelligence reporting and capabilities.
Senator Bennett.
Thank you. Thank you for your generosity, Mr. Chairman, in letting us have a second question. Thank you again for hanging in there with this discussion, Colonel Gabbard. The House Intelligence Committee review of the Snowden disclosures found not only that he was a traitor, but that since Snowden's arrival in Moscow, he has had and continues to have contact with Russian intelligence services. You can see the deep concern on both sides of the aisle here. You had in your opening statement all kinds of complaints about former officials in the intelligence agencies, the United States press, the journalists, the media, Democrats, suggested that you weren't being treated fairly when you were coming here. No condemnation at all for this, which leads me to wonder why it is so hard for you to say that Edward Snowden was a traitor to our country. And the question I guess I have for you is how, if you can't say that, you feel that the concerns that this committee has, that we need somebody here who will actually honor their oath, as you said. Maybe I should make it easier for you. Edward Snowden did not honor his oath to the Constitution, which is what you just said was the most important duty, most important obligation that you have in this role. Why is he being treated like a folk hero by you instead of the traitor that he was?
Senator, as I said, my focus and what should be of relevance to all of you and everyone watching is what I will do as Director of National Intelligence to work with you to make sure there's not another Snowden-like leak, given the paramount importance of our national security and keeping our nation's secrets. I've laid out a number of ways that I intend to do that, if confirmed, in fulfilling my responsibility in this role.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Gillibrand.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to continue along with regard to China because it's such an important part of your portfolio. And I know on armed services, you've had hearings over the last 15 years about their architecture and how they're building up space capabilities, sea capabilities, Air Force capabilities, every type of capability they possibly could. And that aligned with their malign foreign influence and with their ambition with regard to Taiwan. It just creates a very dangerous scenario and concerning one. And so I wanted to ask you about Japan because recently, about a year and a half ago, 13 months ago, you said that you didn't think it was wise to allow Japan to build up their own defense architecture. And you thought it was short-sighted. Can you speak a little bit about that? Because our alliance with Japan is so important in our ability to defend against malign activities of China, not only geographically, but because for the last 50 years they've been close allies that we rely on. We share intelligence, we share operations, they are a great ally. So what was your concern about, and have you had any views that have shifted in that regard?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Senator. I agree. Japan has been a strong ally of the United States in a different capacity as a member of the Hawaii National Guard. I've gone and conducted training missions in Japan with the Japanese Self-Defense Force. Their forces and their constitution has been primarily focused on self-defense. The concerns that I had raised previously had to do with really looking at the bigger picture of the context of the history with Japan and China and recognizing the implications of how this kind of shift from a self-defense posture that Japan has had constitutionally to a more offensive posture could result in escalation. And given the history, we need to acknowledge what the ramifications could be to our own security interests. And that's something that I am looking forward to being able to provide to all of you and to the President, if confirmed as Director of National Intelligence, is that in-depth analysis and assessment so that various policies or actions that you all or the President are considering are fully thought through, given that broader context of nuance of history and the complexities that exist within the Asia-Pacific region. Having grown up there, I'm very familiar with.
But you do
Thank you, Senator Gilbert. Senator Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Colonel Gabbard, when Russia was denying Assad's use of chemical weapons, they accused the U.S. of supporting terrorists. This is a line that Putin used frequently during the Syrian civil war as he supported Assad. Syrian officials made similar comments. They did it repeatedly. They did it in public. They did it at the United Nations. In 2016, you gave an interview in which you said, and this is a quote, "The U.S. is providing direct and indirect support to terrorist groups in order to overthrow the Syrian government." And in 2019, on the Democratic presidential debate stage, you said of President Trump, this is a quote, "This current president is continuing to betray us. We were supposed to be going after Al-Qaeda, but over years now, not only have we not gone after Al-Qaeda, our president is supporting Al-Qaeda." So I'm interested to hear, what was your goal in saying these things? And did you consider, before saying them, the motives of Iran and Russia, what their motives might have been before making these claims?
Senator, as someone who enlisted in the military specifically because of Al-Qaeda's terrorist attack on 9/11 and committing myself and my life to doing what I could to defeat these terrorists, it was shocking and a betrayal to me and every person who was killed on 9/11, their families and my brothers and sisters in uniform. When as a member of Congress, I learned about President Obama's dual programs that he had begun really to overthrow the regime of Syria, and being willing to, through the CIA's Timber Sycamore program that has now been made public, of working with and arming and equipping Al-Qaeda in an effort to overthrow that regime, starting yet another regime change war in the Middle East. DoD Train and Equip program, again, begun under President Obama, is widely been known, looked at, and studied, that ultimately resulted in over $500 million being used to train who they called moderate rebels, but were actually fighters working with and aligned with Al-Qaeda's affiliate on the ground in Syria, all to move forward with their regime change and not acknowledging what was obvious at the time and what has unfortunately borne true, which was that a regime change war in Syria, much like the regime change wars in Iraq, the toppling of Gaddafi and Mubarak, while these are all dictators, would likely result in the rise of Islamist extremists like Al-Qaeda taking power. I shed no tears for the fall of the Assad regime, but today we have an Islamist extremist who is now in charge of Syria, as I said, who danced on the streets to celebrate the 9/11 attack, who ruled over Idlib with an Islamist extremist governance, and who has already begun to persecute and kill and arrest religious minorities like Christians in Syria.
I understand.
Why that should be acceptable to anyone is beyond me.
It should
is
be.
certainly
And I
not in our
understand.
interests.
I appreciate your answer, and thank you. My concern has to do with the tendency to repeat Russian and Syrian, and even in some cases, I think we'll get into in the closed session, Iranian information, and to discount what comes from our intelligence community.
Senator, every American deserves to know that people in our own government were providing support to our sworn enemy, Al-Qaeda. That should not be acceptable by anyone.
Thank you, Senator Kelly. Ms. Gabbard. In conclusion, Senator Warner.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, one of the things I love about this committee, and I know folks who are here from Ms. Gabbard may not fully remember, but this has always been a bipartisan committee. And, you know, my friend Richard Burr, who said we always kind of follow the truth. One of the most things I was always proud of in the very challenging Russia investigation was, you know, people would come in, they didn't know whether the staffer was a Democrat or Republican, because they were all looking out for the same thing. Ms. Gabbard, I support and commend you for your service. But we have heard this morning taking some individuals' advice on chemical attacks, not taking American intelligence community that, as we subsequently discovered, had iffy ties, not enough due diligence. We've heard this morning on your trip to Lebanon that you weren't fully aware that the folks who originally paid for the trip had these relations and ties to this Syrian party. I know I've asked you, and I understand on the trip that you said you met with Shia religious figures and you didn't know who they were. I can understand that, although I can't imagine Shia religious figures that in the Bekaa Valley that didn't have ties to Hezbollah. We can have a difference of opinion on TikTok. The chairman and I feel very strongly that it is a national security threat. On 702, I'm candidly confused. I thought you answered Senator Wyden you're in favor of a warrant. Senator Cornyn, I thought you backed off of that. And then on Edward Snowden, you won't back off of Brave. You won't back off of your legislation. You won't call him a traitor. And I think again about this is being watched by our allies around the world. I think even RT's been tweeting about it today, blasting me. And the men and women of the intelligence community. I don't know how they're going to have confidence that under your leadership, if somebody else stepped out, that you wouldn't take the same position that you've not walked away from on Mr. Snowden. So I guess my last question, this is one I think was in some of the press, and I believe you and your husband took a trip to Rome last summer. And you know, I'm not talking about the conference. I think you didn't ask who paid for the trip. I just want to get this off the record right now. Not if you and your husband reimbursed, but did you pay for the trip in the outset, or?
There was a nonprofit organization that was coordinating with the Vatican to set up this meeting that was centered around peace and security interests in the Western Hemisphere.
I'm not going to go into
that.
I just wanted
the
to just make sure so you didn't understand your trip was paid for by a gentleman named Pierre Louvarier and the Clementi Foundation.
The nonprofit, my understanding, was paid for the trip.
Mr. Louvarier has enormous ties to Konstantin Malov. I'm mispronouncing his name, but who is somebody that America has sanctioned. I imagine we can get into this in the classified hearing, but again, the due diligence that's required before you take these trips or make these assumptions is something that I find very troubling. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Warner. I would also note that that same New York Times story reported there's no indication that Ms. Gabbard did anything wrong on that trip. Ms. Gabbard, thank you for your time and for your testimony. Thank you, most importantly, for your service to our nation. As I said at the outset, it's no secret that this nomination has generated more attention and interest than most nominees before this committee. We have received a large number of statements, letters, and other such materials in support of and in opposition to Ms. Gabbard's nomination. I will submit all of those for the record. For the benefit of senators, it is also my intention to hold a committee vote on Ms. Gabbard's nomination as soon as possible. Therefore, for planning purposes, any senator who wishes to submit questions for the record after today's hearing, please do so by close of business tomorrow. That is Friday, January 31st, 5 p.m. Eastern Time. Now, let me explain what will happen next. Committee security and Mrs. Gabbard's security will escort her and her immediate party out of this room through the door behind me. Everyone else will remain seated in this room. The Capitol Police will secure that door so no one else leaves this room until Ms. Gabbard has reached her break room in preparation for the closed session. We will convene in that closed session in approximately 30 minutes at 1:10 p.m. This open session is adjourned.
Ladies and gentlemen, I expect that